Caitlin Clark's record-breaking Nike deal was supposed to be the story. 8 years, huge money, signature shoe, equity. The kind of package women's basketball had literally never seen before. But while everyone was arguing over numbers and GOAT debates, something much quieter was happening behind the scenes, something that didn't just change Clark's life, but started changing someone else. A role player. Reports claim that one unusual request from the WNBA's biggest new star forced Nike to rethink how it handles endorsements for the rest of the league, and put a veteran like Sophie Cunningham in a position nobody expected her to be in. Because this wasn't just a case of a brand betting on a superstar. It was a collision of rivalry, respect, and money that turned into an experiment. What happens when the most marketable player in women's basketball decides her deal shouldn't only be about her? The first thing you have to understand is that Caitlin Clark's Nike deal doesn't look like the old-school endorsement contracts that most women's players grew up watching from a distance. This wasn't, here's some gear and a bonus if you make an all-star team. Reports claim it's an 8-year commitment with 7-figure money, signature shoe opportunities, and even equity elements that keep paying long after the last jumper falls. That's the kind of structure you usually only hear about in men's basketball: global faces, long-term brand partners, not just endorsers. Clark brings all the ingredients companies dream about. She shattered college records, dragged ratings into territory women's hoops had never seen, and turned arenas into sold-out events home and away. Jerseys with her name became must-have items overnight. And off the court, her following is just as lethal. Millions across platforms, from hardcore hoop heads to casual fans who didn't care about women's basketball until she made them. For Nike, that kind of crossover appeal is gold. You're not just slapping a logo on a sneaker. You're building a product line around an athlete whose name alone moves attention. Signature shoes, branded apparel, collabs that jump from the court to streetwear. The kind of stuff that doesn't just sell because it's functional, but because it represents something: confidence, range, a new era of what women's basketball looks like when it's treated like a real business. And the structure of Clark's reported agreement shows Nike understands that. Equity isn't just a bonus, it's a way of saying, we are tied together in this. The better you do, the better we do, and the better we do, the more you eat. That's a partnership, not a handout. But here, where it gets interesting. Because while all of this was happening in the headlines, big numbers, big years, big expectations, there were players like Sophie Cunningham watching from a very different position. Not as the face of a global corporation, not as the league's main character. As a grinder, a shooter, a competitor who's been one of the Mercury's toughest, most reliable pieces, but has never lived anywhere near that endorsement stratosphere. Historically, WNBA endorsement money has flowed like this: a massive wave for one or two names, and then tiny streams for everyone else. Role players usually get the same kind of deals fans assume they all have: some shoes, some clothes, maybe a small check if a campaign actually rolls. So when Clark signed that monster contract, most people assumed it would just widen the gap. One star pulls further away, the rest of the league keeps chasing scraps. What they didn't see coming was the way that deal, and Clark's own perspective on it, would quietly connect to someone like Cunningham. And that bridge didn't start with a brand strategy meeting. It started on the court, in real competition, where respect always comes first. Before there was any talk of shared deals or Nike shifting its playbook, there was just basketball. Sophie Cunningham isn't a household name outside hardcore W fans, but inside the league, people know exactly what she is. Drafted by Phoenix, carved her way into the rotation not with hype, but with toughness. A guard who will hit the three, take the charge, talk the talk, and still be the first one to sprint back on defense. Coaches trust her, teammates love her, opponents hate guarding her. Now picture that colliding with Caitlin Clark in a real game. You've got the new face of the sport, the walking ratings machine, pulling up from the logo and commanding double teams. And across from her, you've got Cunningham, one of those players who earns every minute by making life miserable for stars. Hard closeouts, physical drives, little bumps off the ball that never show up in the box score. By all accounts, those early meetings between Clark and the Mercury were tense, chippy, the kind of games where fans get loud, social media starts clipping every interaction, and everybody wants to know, is there beef? You could see Cunningham digging in defensively, refusing to give Clark anything easy. You could see Clark still getting hers, refusing to be bullied out of her game. And that's exactly how respect starts in a league like the WNBA. Because under all the noise, players notice who competes straight up. They know who ducks matchups and who steps into them. They know who can take a hit, bounce back up, and still hit the shot in your face. That's the kind of dynamic that turns rivals into something more complicated, rivals who actually rate each other. Reports suggest that after those matchups, the energy between Clark and Cunningham didn't stay stuck at enemy mode. Social media made it easy to see that, likes on each other's posts, quick comments, little signs that, off the court, there was more respect than people realized. And in the W, that matters. Because unlike some other leagues, the culture here leans toward connection. Veterans mentor rookies they used to battle with. Players from different teams train together overseas, share agents, swap stories about the grind. Everybody knows how tight the margins are for women's basketball and how few players get truly life-changing checks. So when someone like Clark hits a level nobody else has ever seen, record deal, equity, full global campaign energy, players like Cunningham are watching two things at once: the business gap and the fact that the person at the top still plays hard, still respects the game, still understands the grind. That's the soil this whole story grows out of. Not fake friendship, not PR, a real understanding between two very different players, one who's finally seeing the ceiling break and one who's been banging on that same ceiling for years. And it's in that space, between rivalry and recognition, that the next part of this story starts. Because once Clark realized how wide the gap really was, rumors suggest she didn't just cash the check and move on. She asked a question almost nobody at her level ever asks. Is there a way this deal can help more than just me? Most superstars spend their first big contract meeting doing one thing, making sure every line in that deal is maximized for them. More years, more money, signature shoe, bonuses, maybe some appearance protection. That's normal. That's how the game has always been played. But rumors suggest that when Caitlin Clark's camp sat down with Nike to structure the details of her massive agreement, the conversation didn't stay in the usual lane. Yes, she wanted the signature product line. Yes, she wanted long-term upside through equity, not just a one-time payout. But according to people familiar with those talks, there was another point she kept circling back to. What about everyone else? Not everyone else in a vague charity sense. Everyone else in her asterisk world. The players she just battled against. The ones who didn't have a fraction of her leverage, but still carried the league on nights when the cameras weren't all aimed at her. Names like Sophie Cunningham, glue players, vets, shooters, defenders. The people who make the game look good, even if their social numbers don't light up presentations in a boardroom. It's been said that Clark's message to Nike was pretty simple. If you really want to invest in women's basketball, it can't just be a one-woman show. From a brand perspective, that hit differently. Nike has always known the power of a singular star. Jordan did it, LeBron did it, Kobe did it, but the women's game has a different rhythm. W fans don't just rally around one face, they rally around the culture, the rivalries, the friendships, the clashes between teams and styles and personalities, a league that lives on community coverage, not just star-only highlight reels. Clark, smart enough to understand the room, leaned into that. Reports claim she pushed for a structure where her deal wasn't just a straight, isolated Supermax endorsement, but a foundation Nike could build other relationships on, collaborative campaigns, linked appearances, space in her ecosystem for other W players whose jerseys might not be best sellers, but whose games and personalities fans already love. That's where someone like Cunningham enters the picture in a real way. She's exactly the kind of player this kind of thinking helps. Valuable, respected, visible to real hoop fans, but not the type of name who gets 8-year, equity-based deals dropped on her doorstep. Under the old model, she'd be lucky to get a modest check and some gear. Under the kind of structure Clark was nudging toward, she could actually become part of a * portfolio *, one where top stars pull others into the light with them. For Nike, there's business logic in that too. One giant bet on a single athlete is risky, but one giant bet that also seeds a network. That's how you build a * culture around a brand, not just a campaign. If Clark is the headliner, Cunningham and players like her become the supporting cast that makes the story feel real. And little by little, that's exactly what started to happen. Because once you have a superstar saying, "This deal shouldn't only be about me," suddenly, the brand has a new question to answer. How do we turn one contract into something that lifts an entire tier of players? Nike didn't come out with a press release saying, "We've changed the entire endorsement game because Caitlin Clark asked nicely." That's not how this works. But if you watch how their women's basketball strategy moved after her deal, you can see the shift. Instead of treating Clark like an isolated billboard, Nike started building what some insiders describe as a portfolio around her, campaigns where she's the anchor, but not the only face. Reports claim internal conversations turn toward questions like, who fits around her, who does hardcore W fans already ride for, who can stand next to Clark in a commercial and feel authentic, not forced. That's where a name like Sophie Cunningham suddenly stops being invisible. She's not a top 5 jersey seller, she doesn't have millions of followers, but she does have something brands care about: credibility. When real hoop fans see Cunningham in a spot, they know it's not just a random extra. This is someone who's taken big shots, brought edge to playoff games, and earned her respect the hard way. Rumors suggest Nike started exploring tiered deals built off the Clark era. Clark as the featured athlete with the long-term equity and signature product. Mid-tier W players like Cunningham brought into *linked activations *, joint photo shoots, shared campaigns, regional tour. Bonuses and appearance fees that, while nowhere near Clark's numbers, are still far beyond what role players used to see. In other words, instead of one massive wave crashing on a single shore, the tide started to spread. For Cunningham, that reportedly meant moving from basic level support, gear, small stipends, maybe occasional usage, to something more structured: scheduled appearances, co-branded content, being named specifically in campaign decks as part of Clark-adjacent storytelling, toughness, shooting, underdog grind. And Nike didn't do this out of charity. They did it because the data told them something important. W fans respond best when they see relationships *, not just solo stars. Posts of players supporting each other, mixing teams, joking around, hyping one another's games, those go crazy online. The energy of the women's game is communal, so building endorsement structures that reflect that isn't just nice, it's smart business. A Clark-centric ecosystem that lifts role players like Cunningham gives Nike more faces to feature across different markets, more social feeds amplifying content, more stories that feel like the real WNBA culture instead of a brand fantasy. And here's the subtle but powerful part. Once one player like Sophie gets pulled into that orbit, it proves the model. It shows other mid-tier athletes that they aren't permanently locked out of meaningful endorsement money just because they're not a face of the league. It shows future superstars what's possible if they're willing to use their leverage creatively. All because one deal stopped being a straight, pay-the-star play and started becoming a platform. And that's when the entire structure of women's basketball endorsements starts to look different. Because if this works, if it sells, if it moves product, if it builds deeper fandom, then the question won't be, why did Nike do this once? It'll be, why wouldn't every brand do it this way from now on? For most of the WNBA era, the endorsement world has been brutal in its simplicity. Either you're *, the * star, or you're basically background. The top 1 or 2 names in the league might land the big shoe deals, the commercials, the recurring campaigns. Everyone else, free gear. A couple of small checks, maybe a regional commercial if a local sponsor is paying attention. Nothing that changes your life. Nothing that lets you think long-term the way male stars do. Sophie Cunningham is the perfect example of who that system leaves behind. She's exactly the kind of player coaches dream about and accountants ignore. Tough, smart, willing to guard the best perimeter option, comfortable taking big shots without needing the ball every possession. Phoenix has leaned on her in the playoffs because they know she won't shrink when the lights hit. Yet, under the old endorsement model, her market value barely registered. That's the gap this new approach starts to close. By attaching mid-tier players to a superstar ecosystem, instead of treating them as unrelated, Nike and Clark have essentially created an asterisk middle class of endorsements for the WNBA. Not everyone will get Clark-level money or a signature shoe, but someone like Cunningham can actually lock in multi-year security instead of one-off seasonal deals. Become a recognizable face in specific campaigns. Think toughness, grit, clutch, instead of just jersey number 9 in the background. Build her own brand lane off that exposure. Clinics, camps, merch, local partnerships that suddenly see her as more than just bench shooter. The money matters, but so does the storytelling. When fans see Clark in a Nike spot with someone like Sophie next to her, they start learning more names. They start saying, "Oh yeah, that's the one who gave so-and-so trouble in the playoffs," or "I remember her hitting that game winner last year." That recognition translates into jersey sales, social media growth, and leverage for future negotiations for Sophie and for players like her. And it changes how younger players look at their own careers. Before, the unspoken message was, if you're not the face of a franchise by year 2, your endorsement ceiling is basically set. Now, the idea of a role player with a real portfolio doesn't sound ridiculous. It sounds like a path. Sports business experts have been saying for years that women's sports don't suffer from a lack of talent. They suffer from a lack of distribution of attention and investment. What Clark and Cunningham's connection hints at is a simple fix. Use the star's spotlight to illuminate the ecosystem, not just the name on the marquee. And this isn't just about helping friends or being generous. It's a strategic bet that a deeper, more visible league is more valuable for everyone asterisk, including the biggest star. The more fans know and care about players like Sophie, the richer and more stable the entire product becomes. Which leads to the real shift hidden in all of this. The role of a superstar is evolving from sponsored to sponsor. Here, where this whole thing quietly becomes way bigger than one Nike contract. Because if the rumors are true, that Caitlin Clark used part of her leverage to push for more structured support around other W players like Sophie Cunningham, then she didn't just secure a bag. She stepped into a completely different role in the ecosystem. Not just the asterisk-sponsored athlete, but almost a sponsor in her own right. Think about how unusual that is. For decades, the model was simple. Brands choose a face, pour everything into them, and hope the aura trickles down to everyone else. The athlete's job is to perform, stay marketable, and post the right ads when the campaign drops. What happens to their teammates or rivals financially, that's not their lane. But Clark is part of a different generation of athlete, one that watched stars in men's sports build empires, invest in businesses, and consciously elevate the people around them. She's seen LeBron create media platforms and schools, seen Serena invest in founders, seen superstars in other sports push for better contracts, better facilities, better conditions for everyone asterisk, not just their tax bracket. The women's game has always had that mindset culturally. What it hasn't always had is the asterisk money to match it. Now there is finally a player with both, the culture and the capital. By reportedly asking Nike to think beyond a single athlete model, Clark basically tested a new template. Use your own, once-in-a-generation deal as leverage to negotiate for others. Not in a loud, pay my friends or no deal way, but in a strategic, this is how you get the best return on me pitch. Because she's not wrong. A league where the star is miles ahead of everyone else commercially is fragile. If that star gets hurt, leaves, or cools off, the whole project wobbles. A league where the star pulls others up with her, that's durable. That's a network. That's something fans and brands can keep investing in year after year because it doesn't depend on one person being superhuman forever. And here's the part that should have every young athlete paying attention. If this model works, if Nike, Clark plus Circle strategy with players like Sophie boosts sales, strengthens the W's profile, and locks in more casual fans, it becomes an asterisk negotiating precedent. Future superstars can walk into their own endorsement meetings and say, I want my deal, but I also want a fund for role players in my league. I want signature shoes, but I also want annual campaigns featuring 3 other W players I choose. If I'm helping you build a culture, I want part of my value tied to how well you invest in that culture, not just in me. That's a massive mental shift. It turns endorsement talks from "what can you pay me" into "what can we build together," and it gives mid-tier players something they've never really had before, a realistic chance to benefit when someone at the top finally breaks through. Social media only amplifies this. When fans see Clark reposting Sophie's campaigns, hyping her performances, and tagging her in Nike content, that's free advertising for both the player and the brand. It keeps reinforcing one message: this isn't a one-woman story. This is a league story, and its biggest star is choosing to share the stage. And that brings us to the biggest question hanging over all of this. If one friendship, one rivalry, and one massive contract can nudge a giant like Nike toward a more collective model, what happens when an entire generation of women's basketball stars starts asking for the same thing? Right now, what's happening between Caitlin Clark, Nike, and players like Sophie Cunningham still feels rare, an experiment, a wait and see. But if it works, it won't stay rare for long. Because brands pay attention to one thing above everything else: what moves people. If collaborative models, where a superstar is the anchor and a circle of other W players get real shine, start pulling in better engagement, better sales, and more loyal fans than solo star campaigns, you can bet other companies won't sit on the sidelines. Gatorade, Adidas, Under Armour. Smaller lifestyle brands that want into women's sports. They'll all start asking the same question: how do we build our own version of this? Not just who is our Caitlin, but who are the Sophies we can lift up alongside her? And once that door is open, the negotiating script for elite women's players changes for good. Instead of walking into a meeting trying to squeeze every last dollar out of a one-off deal, future stars can think bigger. They can say, I want a long-term partnership, and I want part of that to include guaranteed campaigns with role players from my league. I want equity, and I want a portion of brand spend earmarked for women who don't usually get deals at this scale. If you want to market me as the face of a movement, I want to know how you're actually supporting the movement. That's not just moral positioning, that's leverage. And it ripples down fast. Rookies coming into the W start to understand that you don't have to be the main character to build a brand. If you play hard, stay authentic, and connect with fans, there is now a real chance a superstar's ecosystem or a brand's collective model can scoop you up. Vets who used to feel like the endorsement window had passed can see a path back if the right campaign needs toughness, leadership, or specialist skills. It also changes how leagues think. If the WNBA sees that multiplayer campaigns built off star deals are fueling jersey sales, TV ratings, and social buzz, it gives them more ammo in their own talks with sponsors and broadcasters. Don't just buy asterisk her asterisk, buy into all of this asterisk. And for fans, it makes the story richer. Instead of only learning one or two names through commercials, they start recognizing entire rosters. Commercial breaks become mini introductions. Here, the sniper off the bench. the defensive stopper, the emotional heartbeat of a team, all of that builds attachment. Attachment turns into ticket sales, streams, and merch. It's easy to look at Caitlin Clark's deal and see it as the top of a pyramid. But the way this is unfolding, it looks a lot more like a foundation. And players like Sophie Cunningham, who have been holding the line for years without the pay to match, might just be the first proof that this new foundation can actually hold. The only real question now is simple. Will this stay a one-off experiment tied to Clark's unique star power? Or is this the moment every elite woman in the game realizes her next contract can be more than just a personal win? When you zoom out, this doesn't look like a feel-good one-time gesture anymore. It looks like a blueprint. Caitlin Clark didn't change the math by herself. Nike still has bottom lines, marketing plans, and shareholder calls. Sophie Cunningham didn't suddenly become a different player overnight. She was always that competitor, that shooter, that teammate. What changed was how all of those pieces were allowed to connect. A superstar finally had enough leverage to say, "This system can be better," and a brand finally had enough incentive to listen. The result isn't some perfect utopia where every WNBA player wakes up with a massive shoe deal. The gap is still real. Clark is still in a different financial galaxy than most of the league. But for the first time, there's a visible path between those worlds that isn't just fantasy. Stars can now point to something concrete and say, "Look, there is a way to negotiate that helps more than just me." Look, brands will build campaigns that include the grinders, not just the headliners. Look, fans actually respond when you show the real ecosystem instead of pretending it's a one-woman show. For mid-tier players, it quietly changes the question from "Will I ever be her?" to "How do I make myself impossible to ignore when the next shared spotlight deal gets built?" Hustle, personality, social connection, and on-court impact all matter differently when brands are looking for a supporting cast, not just a solo act. And for the sport as a whole, it proves something a lot of people have been saying for years. Women's basketball doesn't just need more money at the top. It needs smarter money that understands the culture, the way these players actually relate to each other, and the fact that fans are buying into a community, not a character. If Clark's deal and Cunningham's elevation really are the first chapter of that smarter money era, then this isn't just a cool story about generosity or friendship. It's the first draft of a new kind of contract, one where the biggest name in the room doesn't just cash in, but quietly decides who gets pulled into the light with her. The next time a WNBA star sits across from a brand and starts talking numbers, don't just ask what she's getting. Ask who she's bringing with her.